Risk from the variants we know about that might disrupt the efficacy of the current vaccines.
They are the most likely to be the ones where they may require a boost because the antibodies or the T cells are reducing.
Also this lunchtime, shot and strangled. The British woman murdered in Pakistan. Police search for 2 men. Here, the number of people depressed has doubled since the pandemic. We'll get advice. And they can't get back to the beaches of Normandy, but this year veterans can gather to commemorate the D-Day landings.
This is the ITV Lunchtime News with Nina Hossain.
Good afternoon. Can the UK stop a third wave with a booster jab this autumn? That's the aim. The plans do have COVID vaccines ready by September if the current ones are shown to be less effective because of new variants. The government says it is future-proofing the country with more research into vaccines and the variants and more testing. With the details, here's our political correspondent, Carl Dinnan.
And a sharp scratch.
Whilst many people are still booking in for their first or second vaccinations, planning is now ramping up for potential third or booster jabs to start in the autumn. Work is still being done, but it's the most clinically vulnerable who would likely get any booster jabs first.
They are the most likely to be the ones where they may require a boost because the antibodies or the T cells are reducing. That piece of work itself will inform Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer's decision. We have to be ready for him. If he needs to boost by September, we'll be ready for that. But if the clinicians decide we need to go a little later, then we'll also be ready for that.
Any vaccination booster programme would be informed by the CovBoost study into which booster jabs are most effective. From September, the NHS is on standby to start booster shots, but chief medical officers could decide to wait and give them alongside the winter flu jabs. One reason boosters might be needed is that current vaccines tend to prevent serious illness, but don't necessarily stop infection.
We are seeing cases in people who've been immunised, and people who've had vaccines should not imagine that they're somehow, armour-plated. The protection these vaccines give really work at the population level, and it's all about getting enough people immunised that the virus really runs out of places to go.
Another reason is the possibility of viral evolution, and the Public Health England lab at Porton Down is getting a £30 million funding boost for research into new variants.
It is important that we investigate those changes in the virus to ensure that the vaccines that we're using in this country are effective against the strains circulating here.
The good news is that vaccine enthusiasm seems to be as strong as ever.
I think the booster vaccine jab is quite a good idea.
It's kind of a risk-benefit analysis that I took, so yeah, I would rather have it than not have it.
And if take-up is high enough amongst the older age groups, it's reported that younger people might not even need to have booster shots. Carl Dinnan, ITV News, Westminster.
Let's get reaction to some of that from the GP, Dr. Sarah Jarvis. Good afternoon. Are you reassured that the government seems to be taking this belt and braces approach to the battle between the vaccines and the variants?
I'm extremely reassured. I think one thing that we have done in the UK very well during the pandemic is vaccine rollout. Another thing that we've done very well is genomic testing for these variants, and then providing so-called surge testing when we identify them. There's no question in my mind that the single biggest threat of a third wave for the UK is a variant coming in either from abroad or springing up in the UK. And that's why I think it's so important that we do have this increased capacity. The new service at Porton Down is going to be able to provide, rather than 700 tests, 3,000 tests to see which vaccines will make the most sense and which will provide the best antibody response.
Yeah, all the focus today is on potential of a third dose, a booster dose. As a GP, how will you be persuading younger people to have the first and second, the original jabs, if they feel that they have no risk of dying from COVID?
I've been really reassured at how many people, even younger people, do still seem to be pretty positive about it. When I speak to patients, there's far more likely to be a question of, when can I get it, doctor, when can I get it, rather than I'm not really keen to have it. There have been questions over fertility, and I'm very much able to reassure them that there is absolutely no evidence for that whatsoever. That appears to have arisen because right at the outset we were saying, be careful if you're pregnant, because we haven't done the studies. But we've now got 100,000 people who've had the vaccine during pregnancy in the USA, no evidence of any problems, so we're now vaccinating them. Fertility is another question, which is no idea where it came from, seems to be an issue regularly with vaccines, no evidence of it. But I think the clot issue is finally getting through to people, that actually the risk of having a clot if you have the virus is much higher. And for younger people in particular, long COVID is a real thing.
And as a doctor, presumably you're talking to patients about risk management for all sorts of conditions every single day. We did hear, you've mentioned vaccine enthusiasm there. We heard that in Carl Dillon's piece as well. But what about patients who are older who are still not getting the vaccine? The vaccines minister himself warned today that COVID could still, his words, spread like wildfire in communities where take-up is still lower than the average, and obviously the average in the UK is really high. But what is the best way to persuade those people who, for whatever reason, are still hesitant about having it themselves?
The tragedy is the very communities where vaccine take-up is lowest are the same communities where the risks tend to be highest. It tends to be in areas of deprivation, and we know that the vaccine can spread much more easily. It tends to be in areas with high proportions of ethnic minorities, and we know that they've been so sadly disproportionately affected. We very much need to continue to engage with local community leaders, local religious leaders, and get, whether it's celebrities or local figures who are of that same community, coming out and saying, I did it, what about you? Because I think that there has been a mistrust of the establishment among some groups. I think there has been a mistrust that maybe they were being used as guinea pigs. Absolutely not true in this case. The reason we talked about prioritising people from ethnic minorities was because we knew they were at higher risk, but I do understand that mistrust.
OK. Dr. Sarah Jarvis, as ever, thank you very much for your thoughts. Thank you. India's foreign minister has had to pull out of the G7 talks in London because 2 people in the country's delegation have tested positive for COVID. Subramanyam Jayashankar met the Home Secretary Priti Patel yesterday, but she has not been told to self-isolate. He is attending today's meeting virtually after coming into contact with the suspected cases, but he hasn't tested positive himself. India is not a member of the G7, but is a guest at the talks. Police in Pakistan are searching for 2 men after a British woman was found dead in her rented flat. The body of Myra Zulfikar was found on Monday. She was 24. Her parents are expected to travel to the city of Lahore, where she was staying, later this week. Chloe Keedy has been looking into the case and joins me now. Lots of reports about what may have happened to her. What is the latest from the police?
Well, look, details are still emerging, but what we do know is that Myra Zulfikar only moved to Pakistan 2 months ago. It's understood that she travelled out there for a wedding and decided to stay on. According to Pakistan's Dawn newspaper, she was found dead in the apartment she shared with a friend in Lahore. And a police officer leading the investigation said that she had been shot. Now, it's understood 4 men broke into her flat early on Monday morning, including the 2 main suspects the police are still looking for. The newspaper also reports that Ms. Zulfikar's uncle, who also lives in Lahore, has told police that his niece visited him a few days before she was killed and complained that 2 men were harassing and threatening her because she had turned down their marriage proposals. Well, police there are said to be analysing CCTV as well as Ms. Zulfikar's mobile phone, which was found at the scene. Meanwhile, here it's been confirmed that the Foreign Office is supporting the family.
OK, Chloe Keedy, thank you very much for that. Thank you. A police officer accused of murdering Dalian Atkinson claimed the former footballer threatened to take him to the gates of hell. The second day of the trial at Birmingham Crown Court heard PC Benjamin Monk made the claim while telling investigators he kicked the Aston Villa star once to control and restrain him after he was tasered to the ground. Ben Chapman is at the court this lunchtime. Ben, take us through this morning's evidence.
Well, the jury has been told that Dalian Atkinson died after being tasered for 33 seconds and then kicked in the head while lying on the ground by a police officer. This morning we've been hearing some more about the officer's justifications for his actions. On the night he died, Dalian Atkinson had gone round to his father's house. He was acting strangely. He was shouting in the street. When officers arrived, they say Dalian Atkinson was in an obvious rage, telling them this is the Messiah. He was tasered twice, but it didn't work. And in his own account, given to investigators, PC Benjamin Monk said Dalian Atkinson was coming towards him, saying, "I'm going to take you to the gates of hell." PC Monk fired his taser for a third time and Dalian Atkinson fell to the ground. But the officer, again in his own account, says that Dalian Atkinson was trying to get up, so he kicked him, in his words, in order to control and restrain him. He said he was aiming for Dalian Atkinson's shoulder but ended up kicking him in the head, leaving an imprint on the former footballer's forehead. Now, the prosecution say the excessive tasering and the kicking were the actions of an angry police officer. But PC Monk's barrister asked the jury this morning to remember that the officer was acting in the heat of the moment, that the officer was terrified for himself, his partner and the public, and that he was using reasonable force in self-defence. PC Monk denies murder and manslaughter. His partner, PC Ellie Betley-Smith, denies a charge of assault, and the trial here continues.
Ben Chapman, thank you. The number of people who are depressed has doubled since the pandemic began. New figures from the Office for National Statistics shows 21% of adults in Great Britain experienced some form of depression in the first 3 months of the year. 25% of people living alone had symptoms, up by 10%, and there was an 18% rise in the number of younger people, those aged between 16 and 39, who feel depressed, topping 29%. One person who has been living with mental health issues since the pandemic started is Alyssa Tyra. She told us how it has affected her.
I didn't realise that there was anything different to what was happening to me or to anybody else, and I just felt that the world was changing, and I thought I had to adapt to that, and everyone has to go along with that. Then it started to occur to me that maybe other people weren't having this. Anxiety kicked in, I felt recluse, I felt like I didn't want to go out. Things started to change, and that's when I realised it wasn't normal how I was feeling.
There is no vaccine, of course, for mental health. So how can you help yourself or others? I'm joined by Dr. Shangu Mugazda, a consultant psychologist. Thank you for speaking to us today. What signs should people be looking out for when you're talking about somebody's friend or family member?
I think the signs vary greatly. I think, some of the signs can include things like low mood, being withdrawn, loss of interest, sleep disturbance, but it really varies from individual to individual. And I think it's important to be aware of the changes in behaviors and the changes in those close to us and those we love.
It's hard, isn't it? Because over the past 18 months, I guess, so many people are struggling with so many different aspects of living through a pandemic like this. But what should you do in terms of reaching out to somebody who you know is struggling? Should it be down to just simply saying you need to speak to a GP as opposed to individuals trying to support people that they love?
Yeah, I think that's a really important point, because with all the measures we've had to take during the pandemic, it is difficult to identify, when someone is feeling depressed or whether it's anxiety and so forth. So some of the symptoms are going to be that much more difficult for us to actually pinpoint and to identify. I think it's important always that if we feel that the low mood and the depression is impacting on everyday life, it is important, obviously, to kind of seek that advice and to go and speak to your GP. But there's so many things that, you know, family members and friends can do to support to support you. So it's really kind of key to, you know, keep that listening eye, to watch out for those changes in behavior, and to be available to offer that reassurance and support if needed. There's a lot of stigma, as we know, attached to mental illness, and as such, you know, especially with men, that there is that kind of feeling that, you know, it will be seen as a weakness, and so people usually will, you know, kind of be reluctant to seek support and to say that they're struggling. So
that's what they clearly need to do. Dr. Shungu Mugazda, thank you very much for your thoughts and advice. Thank you.
Thank you.
The SNP's hopes of winning a majority in the Scottish Parliament elections are hanging in the balance, according to the final election poll by Ipsos Mori for STV News. Nicola Sturgeon's party needs at least 65 seats to secure what it believes will be a mandate for a second independence referendum. The poll projects the SNP to end up with 68 seats, the Conservatives on 27, Labour on 19, the Greens on 11 and the Liberal Democrats with 4. Our Scotland correspondent Peter Smith is in the most marginal seat in the country, Dumbarton. Let's turn to this one opinion poll first of all. What is your analysis of it, Peter?
Well, it does show the SNP on course for a majority of 3, but it is on an absolute knife edge, because in order for the SNP to get that majority, they're going to be looking at 9 marginal seats, just 9 seats here in Scotland. Now, I'm in the closest marginal here in Dumbarton. Last time the SNP lost out by just 109 votes. Now, that's how close it is. In those other 8 key swing seats, they're separated by a swing of just 2%. That's what it will take for the SNP to get their majority. They need to take at least 6 of those 9 in order for Nicola Sturgeon to be going forward with a majority, and she would see that as securing a mandate for her party to be requesting a second independence referendum. That's why this election is so important, because this is about the SNP saying Scotland wants a choice, Scotland wants its voice to be heard. And if the SNP falls just short of that majority, and it would only take a few hundred votes the other way rather than tens of thousands, then that would ultimately weaken her hand. Nicola Sturgeon would be beholden to another party, likely the Scottish Greens, who look like they'll be doing well, but it would weaken her hand when she goes to the Prime Minister saying that Scotland wants a second referendum.
So what's at stake for the leaders of all the other main political parties in Scotland?
Well, for Nicola Sturgeon, this is about her life's ambition of Scottish independence and her party's whole reason of being. But for the opposition parties, the 2 main unionist parties in Scotland, Scottish Conservatives, they've campaigned on a message saying, say no to a second independence referendum. That's their whole focus. Labour are saying, forget the divisions of old, we need to move on. Now, neither the Conservatives or Labour in Scotland expect that they will be in power after this election. There's an agreement that the SNP are going to win. The question is, will they win big enough to get an overall majority? Now, keep in mind, we are in a pandemic. It's not likely that there'll be an independence referendum anytime soon, but the days ahead here in Scotland could define the whole century ahead for the United Kingdom.
Peter Smith, thank you very much. Thank you. Party leaders have hit the road in England in a final campaign push ahead of tomorrow's local elections. Boris Johnson enjoyed a bike ride along the canal in Stourbridge with the Conservative mayoral candidate for the West Midlands. The Prime Minister said his party faced some tough contests but were fighting for every vote. And on a visit to a food bank in Pontefract, the opposition leader Sir Keir Starmer admitted that Labour still has a mountain to climb after polls predicted they would lose a crucial by-election in Hartlepool. Once again, there'll be no veterans on the beaches of Normandy this year to mark the anniversary of the D-Day Allied landings. But this year, despite the pandemic, they will be able to gather in person. The event next month will be in Staffordshire with a live link to France, marking 77 years since the biggest combined land, air and naval operation in history. Jonathan Brown has the details.
After a year like no other, memorials to the fallen have seldom been so quiet. But this, the National Arboretum in Staffordshire, will soon be bringing Second World War veterans together once more.
The veterans have been coming together every year since the end of World War II because they're seeking that reconnection with the comrades that experienced the same things that they did. And I know that when they are in the company of their contemporaries, it will mean an enormous amount to them.
Troops had continued to pour into France.
This year will mark the 77th anniversary of the D-Day landings, an assault on Nazi-occupied France on the beaches of Normandy that signalled the beginning of the end of World War II. It will see a dedicated memorial to the British lives lost unveiled at the site of the invasion at Vers-sur-Mer on June the 6th, after veterans helped to raise £30 million to build it.
There are, I think it's 19 cemeteries in Normandy, but there was never, ever one central place where the names were, and that's what upset me.
But COVID restrictions mean British-based veterans won't be able to witness the ceremony in person. Instead, up to 1,000 people can register to see the event live-streamed from the National Arboretum.
It's heartbreaking, but at least the legacy will be that memorial with all the names of everybody who was killed. They were the real heroes. They gave their lives.
22,000 British men and women died during the D-Day landings and its ensuing battle. And next month their names will be together for the first time in decades as their comrades watch on across the Channel. Jonathan Brown, ITV News.
Finally, news of the birth of non-euplets, that is 9 babies. The Ministry of Health in Mali has released this photo, complete with heart emojis, of 3 of the newborns. They are among 5 girls and 4 boys who were born yesterday in Morocco. Their mother was flown there for specialist care ahead of the birth. Scans had only shown 7 babies, but mum and all 9 newborns are doing well. Congratulations to her. Join Mary at 6:30 from me. Bye-bye.